I am Carrie Fullerton, and I have been leading the Diet Rebellion for about 5 years. And I really, really like to bring people in who have special little bits that have really, I don't know, lit me up in this space of self-acceptance and relationship with food and body and like all of this stuff. So this is Julie, and she is amazing. And what I wanted to share, and I guess, I don't know, there's a million things. So let's start with, I love your little bit about like your privilege and about all the places that you are, your introduction. I'd taken a screenshot. I was going to share it, but then I thought I can just let you share who you are and all the different things that you do.
Certainly. So thank you, first of all, for having me. I really love doing things like this and having conversations with people about capacity and self-care and not being so hard on ourselves, especially during a global pandemic, which can be an interesting time for everyone. So my name is Julie. I am a counselor. I'm a professor at Loyalist College. I'm a yoga teacher. I am a student at Guelph Humber. I'm also a mom of a teenage daughter, a wife of a military member, and originally from the West Coast. So I'm actually from Vancouver Island. I've been in Ontario for 6 years. It's very different here, but the issues that people experience with their bodies are so similar everywhere that it was not hard to bring my practice here. So I work virtually and I work in person in Quinte West. And my privileges that I come to this conversation with are that I'm white, I'm cisgender, heterosexual, I'm able-bodied passing, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means.
Yes,
I have financial stability, I have a home. So there's a lot of privilege that exists within me that this conversation comes from. So I understand that a lot of people struggle differently. And so these are very general practices that I put into place that don't necessarily come from a place of privilege altogether, but can certainly end up feeling privileged. So just acknowledging that.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So now that we have the who you are, and by qualifications, you are a registered social service worker. So you do counseling, and you're also a co-founder, co-contributor, co-something for the Braving Body Shame conference. So
yes, I'm actually the founder of it, okay, and the co-host.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to share that link because that's happening soon.
Well, we're doing all the interviews right now. Early bird registration is open, and then it launches January 18th. Just after the New Year stuff that happens. So we're doing all the prep right now. And so the excitement is getting into the early bird and getting into all the giveaways. So yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Very exciting.
Awesome. And maybe we'll do like a whole separate thing just on that so you can tell people more about it.
Definitely.
So today, the purpose that like the main conversation I really, really wanted to have with you today was around this concept of overwhelm, because we are, you know, generally speaking, we live, at least in the Western world here, in a very overwhelmed state as sort of normal. And it's just accepted that this is how it is, which is heartbreaking. Definitely. And then this year we thought, hey, let's also do a pandemic with shutdowns, with school closures, with financial and health concern, with like a million things too. And so right now people are losing themselves. And I know that your practice is filled with people like this, and so is mine. And I remember reading your concept about capacity, and I saw the bucket picture with the holes for self-care, and I went, oh my gosh. Because self-care is something that when I talk to my clients and patients about, they get prickly, right? It's like, oh, Carrie, seriously, like who has time for self-care? And it gets into this other thing that we're not doing well enough, that we're not good enough at, that it's, you know, all of this stuff. So when I saw your thing on capacity, I went, And there we go. So that that is what I would love for you to share a little bit more about overwhelm and about how this concept and an analogy of the bucket for capacity can help us navigate through this, because we're not done.
Definitely. Definitely. I just want to also acknowledge, I don't know if we have American people who watch, but they also are dealing with a global pandemic and an upcoming election.
Right.
So their
There's
buckets
that.
are even more full. And I acknowledge that because I think that it's so important to understand that in our capacity bucket, there are things we don't choose to be in there. They just exist in our capacity bucket. So as you said, you know, we're always living in this state of things can get into our bucket and overwhelm us. Right now, that's a global pandemic. So I'm saying at least half the bucket is already full of global pandemic. So whereas some stuff might be like, you know, parenting or being in a partnership or your business, like there might be little bits that fill up your bucket, but a global pandemic is like a pretty big chunk of what we're existing in right now, because it comes with so many worries, concerns, change, and people just love change, don't they? So it comes with this whole other element. So if you can picture a bucket, half of it's already full with the global pandemic. And then you start to add in work, school, children, partner, health, wellness, food choices, change. Like there's just so much that gets added in. And so if we add, our bucket overflows, and you would think, oh good, then it's just leaking out. Well, it's not intentional. So then it's not productive.
It's messy.
So, right? It's messy and unintentional. And so that's not how we want to have our life, is overwhelmed and messy and unintentional. So my thought is, if we start to implement tiny bits of self-care throughout the day, we start to put little holes in our bucket intentionally to drain out, not overflow out, but actually drain out some of that negativity, some of that overwhelm, so that when things come in, there's still room in the bucket and they go through. So we're always able to keep moving and doing. Not in a let's be productive kind of way, but in a I took time for myself to close my eyes and do some deep breathing for 2 minutes today. I read something, an article or a book or anything like that, that made me feel good for a few minutes today. I stretched my body today. I went for a walk in nature today. I drank water today. I had a really yummy coffee today. I did a word search today. It doesn't matter what it is. It's being intentional and being present with self-care. So it's not bubble baths and manicures and all of that, which are great. It's about what happens daily in our lives. How do we exist with some form of self-care, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical, every single day?
I think that's a thing. I mean, it's a thing that I've certainly been trying to wrap my head around, like, and it shows up everywhere, right? Which is what I find in most of what we do, right? Like, as I'm learning a concept in one area, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
right? And so, like, in my business, actually, my business has provided me with so much of the groundwork to actually dive into my personal work. And, you know, I have multiple sayings, but one of them is that consistency trumps intensity. Because it is so much more important that I do something small regularly than doing something big sometimes. And I think we've forgotten that, or maybe no one taught us that when we're talking about self-care and about copes, right? Like we talk about, well, we're going to take that holiday. We're just going to push it till we hit the holiday. Well, what if your bucket overflows before the holiday hits? Then what?
Or what if the holiday gets canceled because of COVID?
Right?
Like, there's also that, right?
There's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. So if we're always looking forward, we're never present.
Yeah.
And if we're never present, we're never enjoying the moment. If we're never enjoying the moment, we're always anxious or depressed. And yes, those are mental health disorders, but they're impacted by our intention.
Yes.
right? So I think that's the part where I look at privilege, right? Is sometimes self-care can be very like, oh, that's just a privileged thing because it's manicures and bubble baths and pedicures and
Must be nice
holidays.
to have the time and money for
Right.
that. Yes.
Exactly.
And it
So
is, just to be
it
clear.
is completely. And then, so if we roll it back and say, okay, I understand that the financial impact of daily self-care could be quite high if you were to do all of that every day.
Yeah.
However, what if you were to take a moment and reset and ground yourself? What if you were to take a moment and find something that you enjoy to disconnect from technology for just a moment? What if, right, we just took time throughout the day to poke little pinholes in that bucket so it drained out? It doesn't have to be big stuff. It has to be intentional.
So how do you, because I'm imagining some of the people that I know are in this group and whether they're watching live, and I've not figured out, so if you're watching live and I'm not responding, it's because I don't know how to do that. Just, I'm sorry. I promise I'll respond to all the comments after. It's a mystery to me. But anyways, I know that one of the conversations that is happening a lot right now is this level of fatigue, right? It's this, I am exhausted and I need more rest. And I have been the first to say, like, I have to give my body more rest than I am comfortable giving it right now. And I know that that's because my bucket is full. And so how do we reach the people whose bucket is full, possibly overflowing? It's a flippin' mess.
Yeah.
And how do we help them understand that poking these little holes isn't going to be like some big wow, and it's worth it and it's important.
Yeah. So
deserving of priority, right?
Yeah, it really does come down to analyzing why people are in overwhelm, because it helps if the self-care aligns with the why that they're in overwhelm, right? So if it's their job that is continually filling the bucket and creating that overwhelm, then we need to focus on self-care around the job. If it's family, then we need to focus the self-care around the family. Boundaries are great self-care, right? Yes. So again, we need to go backwards a little bit and go, okay, why am I feeling this overwhelm? Why is my bucket leaking everywhere unintentionally? And oftentimes people have or are doing things in their life that would constitute self-care. However, because they're not intentional, they're not helpful, right?
So like, explain that a bit more, expand on that.
Sure, yeah. So for example, you might be reading a book and that might be self-care, but because you're also thinking of your grocery list, your to-do list, your work list, it's not taking care of your mental self-care, right? Or you're going for a walk, but you're angry in your head and you're not focusing on the nature and you're not focusing on the beauty around you and you're not feeling grounded. It's actually working you up. So again, we can be doing things that are great for us, but if we're not intentional about them, we actually lose the point of them. So a lot of times people don't have to add a lot in. It's a mind shift, which can actually be harder than adding something new, but to be fair, but that mind shift can help people really see what they're capable of easier, right? Like, okay, and it doesn't have to be, you can be angry for 28 minutes on your walk, but for 2 of them, you be intentional and just feel grounded, right? Like maybe be angry for the first 28 minutes and then come to a grounded place at the end, right? Like start to look at your life. So one of the things for me is I shower every day. Okay, so it's routine. I get in, I do my thing, I get out. Instead, I found products I love, products that light up my senses. And I use products that make me feel good. So my skincare is important to me. And that made my shower physical self-care, right? Because then I had that moment of just taking a breath. I actually do some physio exercises while I'm in there that I can do standing up. And, I really make multitask, but intentional in a way of how am I helping my body right now? I'll turn the heat up for a little bit of moment on my back, then I'll turn it to cold because I know that's good for my scalp. And so it's become this, how do I take care of myself in the shower? Right?
I love that. It's something you're doing anyways.
Right.
And in all of my programs, that's when we talk about goal setting and implementing things. Like, can you just add it or piggyback it or whatever terminology you want to use to something you're already doing, and how can you remind yourself? So I like to also do some like pelvic floor deep breathing stuff in the shower. So I got myself shower crayons, and so I wrote on the wall to do it. So it's where I reach for my stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, right. And then I can take a breath, and that helps me stay in it. And then I'm aware of the feeling of the water, and I love water, and water is so soothing for my body. So as it's going over my scalp, as I'm feeling the temperature changes, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. And you're right, it's a totally different shower than, okay, I gotta get out of the shower, and then I gotta meet Julie online, and I've gotta get the dog, is he gone out yet? And then I don't even remember if I had a shower today.
Right. Like, and that's like kind of scary, right? That how routine and rote we are with some things. And I think that that's what sort of impacted me to understand that self-care didn't have to be adding something in. It could be really being intentional with stuff I'm already doing. Even adding in gratitude that I have hot running water anytime I want it.
Absolutely.
Right? Such a huge piece, considering all the places, not only in the world, but in Canada specifically, that don't have clean, healthy water.
Yeah.
We need to understand that even just that is a privilege in and of itself. So am I going in with gratitude, or am I going in with just this routine of I got to get it done?
And I would like to just throw out a thing about the gratitude, because I know somebody watching is like, oh my God, gratitude again, gratitude. And something that I think is a really important piece is to remember that, like, gratitude is an and, not an or, right? And that I can feel incredibly grateful for all of the privilege. And, I've said this regularly, for the impact on my immediate family from COVID has been not particularly horrible. We're okay financially. We're all healthy. Like, no one lost their job. Like, we are all really good. And I lose my mind fairly regularly because I had my kid home with me for 6 straight months and my husband for 2.5, which is not, like, it's hard. And so I can feel so amazingly grateful that I have hot water, and that I have food, and that my family is safe, and I can feel overwhelmed and right. And so I just always feel very compelled to say that as soon as gratitude comes up, because it's one of those.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I say it to new patients sometimes. They're like, oh.
I know, because it's become this place of privilege and I don't even know, like, I was gonna say disdain, but like, people are like, me being grateful for that isn't going to change it. No, but it is going to change the way you view it, which then when our views are changed, our thoughts change, our feelings change, and sometimes our behavior change. It creates this whole cognitive behavioral shift that can happen when we start to do that. It's the same as affirmations, which people roll hard eyes at. Like, I can see the full whites of people's eyes when I talk about affirmations. But it's the same thing. If we're intentional about them, we can start to experience a brain shift that just allows us to think, maybe my maladaptive or my negative thoughts aren't super great for me, right? Like, I'm telling myself I'm awesome, but my maladaptive thought tells me I'm not awesome, but I keep telling myself I'm awesome. And that starts to challenge that other thought, which has never been challenged before. Right. So
and sometimes I think, because I get into this too, and I'm not a big affirmation person unless they're being done in a way that is not overly confrontational. So, like, especially in the body image world, I mean, I am not going to have someone stand in front of the mirror and tell themselves that they're absolutely beautiful and sexy if they have never thought that of their body ever, because it's going to create a conflict within their, but an affirmation of, I am learning how to love and accept this beautiful body of mine. Well, that's non-confrontational. That's I'm learning. That's truth. I am learning how to be grateful. I'm learning how to be compassionate. I am learning how to, I don't know, all the million things I'm learning how to do right now. But I think that's important. And the other piece I wanted to say about gratitude is something I'm noticing a lot more of, is people are using their privilege as a weapon against themselves.
Yeah.
And that, well, because I have hot water, like, what do I have to complain about? I have no reason to be this tired. I have no reason to be, like so many other people are struggling in the world. Who am I to? How do you address that piece? Because I find that one breaks my heart every time,
So many other people are struggling, and so am I.
And the word "and," it's
right?
so
Like, it is so powerful. It is, I spent a lot of time in my youth feeling like I came last, which is not a great position for self-care, but I wasn't taught self-care. So therefore I didn't utilize self-care, which makes sense, right? It's hard to use what you haven't been taught. So I spent a lot of time putting others first, which then becomes people pleasing, which then becomes very detrimental to mental health and physical health. So what I learned was to put myself just on my to-do list, right? And if something else is happening in the world, that can coexist with me learning to come to body neutrality or come to believing I'm enough, because I can't assist anyone else in the world from a place of darkness and sadness and despair and self-loathing, right? So I had to work on giving my experience credit for what it was. And then I can use that to help in other ways, right? So that's kind of how I've coexisted together with, there is greater things going on in the world that are a problem and other people are suffering. And I feel like I'm suffering because of XYZ. Therefore, I'm going to work on this so I can help with that. Right? I would never have been able to found and co-host a body image conference had I never gotten to the point where I was body neutral and then working on body acceptance, body love, all of that. There's no way I could have been that person. I would have been like, that's not a thing. I don't even couldn't have even come up with a concept with where I was 10 years ago. Right? Like,
yes.
So again, doing our work is beneficial to the greater good.
And I think that's the piece again that people have just forgotten. And this can get into like a monster conversation going down lots of different branches of the feminist tree, in how we have gotten to a place where women believe that, and it's not just women, I shouldn't be so gender biased, because it really is across all genders. This sense that that like to put our own priorities first is so selfish. And I believed that because it's what I witnessed, for so long. And it wasn't until, and we all talk about the oxygen mask on the airplane thing, and it is still a fantastic analogy. Like it truly is, because like, I remember seeing a Facebook post, and again, this is where some of the self-care stuff are. I was like, I need to come up with a different way to present the self-care concept. So thank you for the bucket. Because this post went around and this woman said, of course of course my self-care isn't prioritized. I would do anything for my kids. I would die for them kind of thing. Of course I don't have time for self-care. And it was just this like to self-care. And it broke my heart, because I thought, those poor kids, like, what are they going to do when you are grounded? Like, you are the one on the floor of the airplane passed out because there's no one, you don't have an oxygen mask on. Like we need to do this in our lives, whether it's for our fur babies, whether it's for our job, whether it's for our passion, our purpose, our mission, whatever it is. If we don't fill our own tank, we cannot serve others. And if serving others is something that motivates you, whether it's your family, or whether it's work, that's a big deal.
Yeah. The problem is though, Carrie, is that we do still serve others.
I know.
Right? And so we burn out. We have compassion fatigue. We experience vicarious trauma. We are, especially helping people, right? Like helpers, we're notorious. Notorious for putting others first and forgetting about ourselves and not having enough time. It is not true. Self-care does not take a ton of time. It takes intention.
Yes.
And it's just, we can avoid burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma by being intentional with ourselves. And that is so, so important, that it doesn't matter how you're a helper. If you're a helper or people pleaser, you need self-care more, right? Like you need the most self-care. And that might mean 10 minutes a day. Like if you're doing 10 minutes a day is going to feel great after a little while. Right? Yeah. It's going to feel complicated and weird and hard and awkward. But when you start to do it and you start to reap the benefits, it's fantastic. Right?
And so I think, how do we help people figure out what those moments are, right? So like I'm thinking in my own day, I'm like that morning tea could definitely be really more about the tea. And as I'm saying it, I'm imagining the warmth of the cup and the flavor and the I find cups of tea all around the house all the time because I don't drink a whole cup of tea, right? My walks are something that I was sharing in the group of the people that have done some of my programs. I was sharing just this sense of overwhelm and like I described it. I had overeaten content. I was needing to digest after my big meal and I just needed to stop because, there's the anti-racism stuff. There's my passion and my work around body image and food and changing the conversation in medicine. And then there's my own family and their stuff and all of the stuff. And so my walks became me consuming content. My morning time with my cup of tea became consuming content. My starting courses and all, I was like, why am I so tired?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So my walks, I don't even plug in music anymore. Sometimes I talk to a friend, but very often I quite purposely go for a walk.
Yeah.
Sit and eat my lunch outside and leave my phone inside. Mm-hmm. What are some other things that you've seen people do or that you've tried yourself? And I love your shower. That's brilliant.
Yeah, my shower is important.
Some other little snippets where I like to talk about mindful moments. What are these intentional moments where they can stick a hole in their bucket without adding to their life?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like is when you look at the concept of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical self-care, that is really personal. So, my shower, I'm deeming my physical self-care, but somebody else, that could be completely mental self-care, right? Like a real cleansing of their mental self-care. There's no phone in there or whatever, right? So again, this is very subjective kind of conversation. Music for me is a huge one. So that's emotional self-care for me. Music definitely is that. Time with friends, whether that's face-to-face or, face-to-face, like this, or on the phone. I'll call my mom sometimes. We have a good relationship. She's on the West Coast, and I'll talk to her on Bluetooth while I drive. Driving, going for drives just is one of my favorite things in the world. There's so many different parts of it that, I love books. So I have a lot of books that have one day things, right? Mm-hmm. So I can just read a page or two and be like, that's it for the day, right? And I just be intentional with that. I'm just looking at my bookshelves and I'm like, yeah, I've got tons of these kind of books that I can just pick up and be like, okay, that reset my intention for today. And I'll often do that must be the page I want to read, right? I don't have to be specific. I don't have to do it every day. But when I was starting this process and how I help clients to start this process, is actually pretty rigid, which is funny. But if we're not rigid, sometimes we don't get to intentional, right? Because we have to learn how to build it in. So the easiest way that I recommend people starting is when you wake up, do something. When you have your lunch, do something. Around your dinner hour, do something. And before you go to bed, do something. That allows for shift work.
Yes.
All right. I had morning and I was like, no, it's upon waking, right? Because people wake up at different times. So
yep.
Have a flexible idea of how to implement each of those aspects throughout the day around those times that are already times that you acknowledge, right? So before bed, you might just even do some stretches in bed and, take that moment instead of reaching for your phone to stretch. This morning, I grabbed the heating pad and helped my uterus feel a little nicer before I got out of bed. And that was lovely. I spent an extra 10 minutes there and it was wonderful, right? Because that's what my body needed then. Nice. So it doesn't mean that my shower doesn't become self-care then. It means I'm doing extra self-care. Okay. Not the worst thing in the world. Doing things like this actually are self-care for me because I get to talk about what I'm passionate about. So then my passion meter's up and that just helps the whole day. Right. So again, it's being intentional with those things. Oh, my dog is gone. Usually my dog's here with me.
Oh,
the door's
like,
open.
this thing, do we need to stop now? No. Okay.
She was like, you're boring, Mom. So my dog, right? Time with her is so important to me. You and I have talked about our dogs being important to us, and, connected time with my daughter is nice. We drive to school in the morning. Sometimes she drives, sometimes I drive. And we have sometimes, once every 2 weeks, we'll have a nice conversation on the way there. More so on the way home because there's a little more energy, at the end of the day than there is at, 7 a.m. Time with my husband when we go to the dog park, that's a really nice time, with him and I, or when we go for drives with coffee. It really just becomes being intentional, and I don't have to set alarms. That's another thing I'll have people do is have your alarm set for 4 times a day, do this self-care for 2 minutes, right? So again, it starts off in this rigid form for a lot of people because they have to build it into their day, but also into their mind that it's important.
Yeah, they need a pattern interrupt. You need that something to strike that first domino to go, oh, right, because I forget to remember all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So doing those little kind of reminders are really helpful. I know for a long time back home on Vancouver Island, I had sticky notes all over the house for things I, needed to remember to do. But it was just for today, do this. When I was starting my journey, I took a little bit from an AA kind of concept of sort of being abstinent of body shaming myself. So it was just for today, be body neutral. Just for today, eat what you need. Just for today, sort of that just for today concept, tomorrow we can go back to hating ourselves if we choose to, but just for today, right? So that became a really big 3 words for me at the very beginning was just for today. Remember that you're enough. Just for today. Because I think that it's overwhelming to look at a life that doesn't exist with all those negative thoughts in our heads. And as soon as they were sort of gone for the most part, I was able to go back to school. I had so much capacity in my brain without all that maladaptive conversation happening constantly within my brain. And
it is remarkable how
since then, and it's only been 7 years.
Every time I think about going back to school, I do a couple of courses that are, in the 10 to 20 hour range. And then I'm oh yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. There was a couple things there. And I should have made notes, but I was being with you, but it is amazing how much, when I start working with someone new who's maybe not too far down the path yet, and I remember how much of my day was consumed by thoughts about my body and or my food, and I giggle on a very regular basis. I put up an Instagram post or something, I think it was last week, about my breakfast. I'm like, hey, what do you think of my breakfast? And it was just because I was giggling as I was doing my breakfast of it's so complicated in the world right now that we have created this like overwhelming, and I talk about how much is in your bucket, like when you don't know what to eat, right? Like I had bread, whole wheat, like full glutinous bread with butter, and I had sauteed a ton of vegetables and put in some bacon, and so like, you know, and it was just making me laugh, and so I took a picture and I was feeling kind of cheeky, but that is massive. And then, yeah, the amount of time that I would spend thinking about my body, being overwhelmed by my body, trying to change my clothes, being committed to changing my body. And it consumed so much time and energy. And it's exhausting. It's hard to hate your body.
Yes. And like, we don't know because it's what we've always done.
Always.
So when
everybody else is doing it.
I know. Yeah. And when I have clients come through that and come to the other side, they're like, I don't even know what to do with all this room. I'm like, I know, right? Like you can change jobs sometimes. I went back to school 3 times. Like people can change the world people can change the world when they stop consuming the negativity about themselves that they are telling themselves because it's what they heard or what they grew up with or what they believe because society tells them. Yeah. We can change the world. And that just could mean we're nicer to ourselves. And isn't that a beautiful change for the world?
Yeah.
Right? It's one less person who's hating who they are and how they exist.
It's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. Let's keep doing this work, Julie. Now, before we end, there is one thing I wanted to circle back to because I think it's so incredibly powerful. Because we like to have all these conversations about health. And look, I'm a doctor, so I get invited into that conversation. It is a value of mine and one that generally people share. It's like I put a post up a little while ago about we can all agree that diets don't work. What we can't agree upon is what makes a diet a diet.
Yes.
And I think the same thing with health. We can all agree that health is an important piece of being human, and we cannot agree upon what makes someone healthy. And there are so many contributors to negative health outcomes that are not visible. And by extension of that, there are many people struggling with all kinds of health issues, and their ability is compromised and yet not visible. And I don't know that enough people talk about that. And maybe someone listening has not actually even considered it. And I know that you know how to speak to this. So
yes,
there's your state.
So on my Instagram and my Facebook, I tend to share some parts of my journey of how I talk about being able-bodied passing. So by able-bodied passing, once I leave the house, I'm usually in a place where I can walk without pain, or at least walk without looking like I'm in pain. However, I live with fibromyalgia, and it can be very challenging some days and sometimes of the month that I don't walk like a able-bodied person. So that can be a really interesting piece. I also live with type 2 diabetes. And that is not talked about very often in a positive or neutral type of way. It's always talked about as a death sentence that's going to, kill all the fat people, which I think is very scary and sad and untrue. So I live with this, but I generally look like I'm dealing okay. So when I teach yoga, the only thing that people see is that I'm a fat yogi. Or a plus size yogi, whatever you want to call it. But they didn't know at the beginning was that it was also very difficult for me to be doing the routines that we were doing. And as I became more accepting of my limits and challenges, I actually started to adapt to a very on the floor, slow, gentle practice that people still responded to. And I was like, oh, so I can take care of me because other people need to take care of themselves that way too. So when we exist with health conditions, we need to understand that there's other people out there who do as well, right? So I accept that that's part of who I am, and it limits much of what I can do. When I stopped being able to lift heavy weights, I took a very long break from working out because I felt shame around that. And I also felt like I had the short end of the stick. Why me? Right? And yet now I lift little weights, or I use a strap or a band, and I do what my body can do. Instead of doing nothing, I do what my body can do. And I teach others to do what their body can do, because health is individual. It is not about what my husband can do or what my daughter can do or what any of my friends can do. You go and run your marathon. You go and do this. For a long time, I couldn't go for a walk because of my lower back. So now I figured out how to do that with the proper shoes and, the right circumstances and all of this stuff that I've figured out for my body. So just go for a walk to a lot of people is triggering because they're like, I can't.
Yeah.
So I'm not good enough now, right? And again, I had to challenge that thought of, no, this is my story. So I don't just think about physical health. I think about, okay, if I wasn't taking medication for my fibro, or I wasn't taking medication for my type 2 diabetes, I would be in a whole other pain level and my pancreas would be having issues. So I'm grateful for the medication. That keeps my mind focused. So now I'm doing mental self-care. I'm helping others, which fills my emotional self-care. Understand that there's this element of health that is so individual. So for me, we also don't owe anybody health. So I could do none of this and I would still be enough. Health is important if you choose it to be and you want it to be an element of your life. And it's going to look different for every single person. That's my soapbox.
I love your soapbox. I am on one directly beside you with a megaphone, because that's the thing, right? I mean, some people choose to step away from exercise for their health. Some people choose to stop trying to lose weight for their health. Some people choose to stop focusing on nutrition for their health. And these are the bits that we lose sight of. In our, and I get it, it's human. We like to categorize, we like to put people in little boxes because it helps us organize our thoughts. Yeah. What we forget to teach our very young folks is that just because someone fits in this box does not mean that they don't fit in 6 other boxes as well as that right?
And I'm going to challenge you, because I don't think it just helps us organize our thoughts. I think it helps us organize our judgments and biases.
Oh, for sure. Right? Absolutely. Like, absolutely.
If they go in that box, then I can maintain my judgment of that, right?
So much easier. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And, I mean, the more I learn in the whole neural world, the more fascinated I am by, how important those categories were way back. And how just because that initial thought is there doesn't mean it's mine. It doesn't mean it's true. And it doesn't mean I have to act on it.
Yeah.
Like, I can have thoughts that I can just go, oh, well, interesting. That's an uncomfortable thought. I don't particularly care for that thought. Thank you very much. And I can choose to behave or think or act differently from those initial instinctual thoughts that I can acknowledge were very important a very long time ago. But they're not very important anymore.
No,
not at all.
No. And I think that the more people who understand that, the better off the world is going to
100%.
be, right? Because we need understanding on so many levels, and the work that we do for anti-racism work and the work that we do for oppression work is just so important and all encompassing of marginalization in a whole, as a whole, right? Instead of like this piece and that piece and this piece and that piece, it intertwines on levels that we need to understand. We need to do the work.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I think we need to do the work when we have capacity. Yes. And we get capacity by doing the self-care.
Yeah. And that's the circle, right? always comes back to, you cannot put more in the bucket than the bucket will hold.
Yeah.
And your bucket, in my estimation, you're born with your bucket. It is the size that it is. That is the volume it is. And whether or not you like the size of your bucket is fairly irrelevant to the size of your bucket. And I think you said that beautifully, and just in terms of that acceptance of your body is different than it was, which means what you can do with your body will change.
Exactly.
And I think so many of us spend so much time suffering because we're angry that our body isn't what we have this vision of, or what maybe it used to be. And I just think if we could just imagine what that would feel like to receive that kind of energy from someone that you love, and use that as that motivation to go, I'm so sorry, body. Like, okay, I'm listening. What do you need? I've got your back. You know, I'm going to screw up. I'm learning, but let's do this. And make today the day that you stick a couple more holes in your bucket.
Yeah, definitely. And again, this comes from small fat privilege, right? So people who are experiencing bodies that are larger than mine are going to have completely different struggles and completely different oppressions.
Yes.
So understanding that, again, what we experience is different than what other people experience. I experience life with white skin. I'm never going to experience what it's like to live in a black body. What I can do is say, I'm going to look at my own internal racism to ensure that I don't do harm intentionally.
Yeah.
Knowing that my unintentional harm may still happen, but it'll happen a lot more if I don't educate myself.
Yeah.
Right? So same as, you know, if we go around thinking, well, I'm in the most oppressed body, you know, we're going to miss the point of being able to help people who are more oppressed than us and be able to help ourselves.
And that's where, you know, that's one of my analogies that not everybody loves, but I love it. We all have our shit to shovel. And the only way it's going anywhere is if you pick up your shovel and start shoveling it and start to take a look and go, oh, that's not even mine. Yep. So that's coming from you. Okay, we're going to do a better job at boundaries here, because I do not have the capacity to shovel mine and yours.
Yeah.
And the stuff that's already in my pile, fine, I get it. I have to shovel it, even though it's not mine, but I will shovel it, but I'm not taking more. Thank you very much. And yeah, it's heavy lifting, and it's okay to take breaks, and it's okay to every once in a while go, I hate this. Take a break. Put a hole in your bucket, and
rest is self-care.
And that is something that, you know, I know most of the people I work with really struggle when we talk about rest, because we interpret it as lazy, and we have all of the, and again, that's not my shit. Someone else put that in my pile. And I need to move it out of my pile, and I need to acknowledge that rest is not lazy. Rest is a vital requirement of being a human. It's not optional. You know,
no, you can't get through life without resting. Like,
no,
you can get through life without resting intentionally, but that sucks. I've done that. Your head still races, and it's not okay. So resting without, or resting with intention, is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's lovely. And it is so restorative. And I'm only just learning it, or I'd say in the last 5 years, where I'm like, oh, I get it. It's like when people, I would ask someone, like, what's in your mind? Nothing. Like, I didn't understand that. And now I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, what's on my mind? That beautiful tree that is now 4 shades of yellow, and like, that's beautiful. And I can focus on that for a few minutes.
Okay. And if you're closing your eyes, you can focus on your breath.
Totally.
Right?
Or the light show, because that's a really cool thing too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's so many more important things for us to be doing than shaming ourselves on multiple levels.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so did we get through everything? Let me check my list. I think that was everything. Okay, so I am going to put in the description of the video all the ways that they can find you, and the Braving Body Shame website, so they can check that out too.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I will see you again soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
Okay.